Good evening, everyone. I hope you're well this evening. Forgive me, my computer is giving me quite a few hassles this evening. It's just a bit slow. I suppose I'll blame the cold weather. So it's a very interesting day for us in economics, which is basically describing every day for us in economics. But at the moment, we are waiting on the American Federal Reserve to tell us what they intend to do with regards to their interest rates. This, of course, becomes quite an important macro decision for any government. And of course, because South Africa chose to hold rates, we took quite a hit on our currency. So hopefully, if the Americans don't raise, we could still level out. Michelle, how can I help?
Good afternoon, ma'am. How are you?
Very well, thanks. And yourself?
I was just trying to survive this cold.
Oh, I'm
Um,
with you.
Ma'am, is there a WhatsApp group chat for this module?
No, there isn't one, but if you guys create one, well, I can try and create one. I just don't know if I can access, I don't think I can access your numbers. So if
Is it
you,
possible if can I create one and then you can just drop your number and then I'll add you to it?
yes, I will absolutely do that. I'll drop my number
Okay, thank you
into
so much, ma'am.
the text. No, thank you so much, Ashil. That's actually a great way for us to communicate as well.
No problem, ma'am.
Because I know sometimes the emails get a bit much. So I'm with you
Yeah,
guys.
and I've been back and forth because I recently just moved to distance learning. So, now my whole student portal has just been messed up with emails and everything because I'm still trying to sort my student portal out. So now, and Emirates is just irritating me with this whole transfer. So my emails
Oh,
have just
good.
been up like booming with Emirates emails.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. The
It's fine.
transition. Oh, and also it's, typically it would probably work quite smoothly, but they're trying to transition so many things at the same time. So we're
Yeah.
becoming Emirates
But
at
I
the
don't
same
understand
time.
because I did submit my transfer. The only reason why I transferred is because I'm now in overseas. And I did give my transfer through in May, and they're still sorting out my finance account and everything. So it's just been a slip.
Oh, goodness, I am so sorry. That is so
That's fine.
irritating. If you need
Am I
me to
allowed to create the
like,
group chat, ma'am?
please, absolutely go ahead.
All right, thank you so
Also,
much.
do you mind if I ask where are you located at the moment?
Sorry.
Where are you at the moment?
Oh, I'm in London.
Awesome. How is it there?
Yeah.
I would love to get some,
Um,
genuine
currently
feedback.
we Currently, it's adjusting to summer. So you get your extremely cold days and then you get your extremely hot days. But yeah, I actually prefer South Africa. From small, my parents have always made us travel and whatever. So, and I've been to quite a lot of countries, but nothing beats South Africa. Like the diversity between the blacks, the Indians, the coloreds, the whites is just something else. Whereas here
Absolutely.
in London, in the UK, it's very much like more towards what apartheid was in SA back then. Like as Indians in London, we've experienced some racism, like, oh, we must go back to India, whatever, whatever. And then once someone actually told my dad that us Indians, we think we're all it, the way we dress, like we think we have too much of money and whatever, whatever. So yeah, we're
Oh,
actually thinking, yeah, so we only here for a few months. My dad got a job offer. So my mom and I came to just let him adjust for a few months, and then my mom and I will come back to SA.
Ah, I think that's but I'm totally understand. I mean, I was
Yeah,
in London about 20 years ago, but as much as you travel, there's just nowhere like South
there's
Africa.
nothing like South
All
Africa.
right.
And like
You
people will
miss
say, oh, it's
home.
a third world country and whatever, whatever. Every country has its own shenanigans, but nothing beats South Africa. And like coming from a Gen Z person, I especially love the diversity. In fact,
Yes.
coming from an Indian, I barely have much Indian friends compared to that of other races.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. You know, and in
Yeah,
South Africa, despite the racial and cultural diversity, we still have things that sort of bond all South Africans. And you really
yeah, that's
realize it when
true.
you travel, you know, when someone speaks Afrikaans, you just know
Like for
that those people
example,
understand.
in Manchester, there was a Nelson Mandela Day celebration. So then my family and I went for it. And it's not really the same as like how SA people do it. You know, we'll have our parties, we'll do an after party,
Yeah,
we'll have our braai, whatever, whatever. It's not the same that's here.
right? And the food, it's just not the same.
The
Like,
food here is very, very bland. And as an
right?
Indian, we love our spices.
You can see why they, originally needed so many immigrants. I mean, goodness. I was like,
Yeah,
why is this? It looks like everybody in the UK cooks by color.
yeah. Like even for example, like how can I phrase this? Um, for example, the healthcare. Okay, yeah, we have a bit of an issue of a healthcare, in terms of healthcare in SA. But
Yes.
with the healthcare here, if you don't have medical aid, you're basically forced to go to the government hospitals. That's too, it's like queues of queues of queues. And that's who they'll just give you, for example, we'll take Panado. They'll just give you their version of Panado, aspirin, whatever. They'll say, yeah, whatever, you just have the minor flu. Meanwhile, you could be dying. They'll just say, no, just take aspirin.
My
And like
goodness.
everything else is actually much poorly maintained compared to SA.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite a
I
deterioration. When
think
I was there, we
I
were
think
so
that
impressed.
the only advantage that the UK has is the transport system. We haven't really
Yes.
used it much. Um, but I think that's the only thing that differs from SA.
Wow. That is that is
Yeah,
incredible. Good. I'm so glad
yeah,
that you're
so
in this class because you can actually tell us exactly um what it feels like because the UK was a capitalist sort of powerhouse,
yeah,
well, they sort of transitioned because the real issue they had with the American Civil War was that the Americans had created quite a robust economy because, of course, they're free capitalists. And in
yeah,
the UK, they've always had quite a socialist sort of underpinning to their economics. So
yeah,
when those two clashed, the UK just couldn't stand up against the US. They're just too much of an economic superhouse. So,
yeah,
today we're going to discuss those economic systems as well. So, especially because the healthcare system, for example, in South Africa, it looks like we're progressing towards the NHI. So our
yeah.
national health
Oh,
insurance.
speaking of the NHI as well, like for example, I got very sick as soon as we moved to well, my dad was here
Yeah.
already, but then my mom and I came just after my summative exams. Shit. And for example, my dad for his visa, so he has I think it's a 5-year vi work visa here. So part for his visa requirement, he had to pay 250,000 rand upfront for the NHI for itself. And mind you, the healthcare system is just very, very poor. And he has medical aid here as well. So I was advantaged to use the medical aid and go to a private GP. But it's not really the same as what it is in SA. SA, yes, you'll pay your expensive consultation fee and then your pharmacy meds, whatever, whatever. But it's not the same. It's very deteriorated in a sense of that you don't get that proper treatment that you're paying for.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. And like it is really deteriorated in the last few decades because their healthcare system used to be the envy of the world.
Yeah. Theirs
So,
and Dubai's were
wow.
actually the best.
Yeah,
So
goodness.
yeah. But I
I mean,
just can't wait to come back to SA.
I can imagine. I
Yeah,
also
I miss
hear
my
that a lot of people go to like Dubai and the Middle East to get like medical care. Is
Yeah,
that
but to get I know I have so a lot of my family members have moved abroad. Yeah. And I had a relative who moved to Dubai. I think it was Dubai or Saudi Arabia a few years ago with his wife and two children. And to get your citizenship in the UAE is very, very difficult. They were there for, I think, just under 10 years and they couldn't get the citizenship. So then thereafter they moved to, I think it's the
what?
Netherlands that they moved to. Yeah. It's very hard to get your citizenship in the UAE. And to be very fair, the UAE is very racist towards other cultures.
That is so true. My
I
goodness.
went to Dubai a few years ago, and okay, I just said that the UK is racist to an extent, but the Arabs in the Arabs in the UAE are way worse, especially if like um how you dress. Oh, for example, I have ear piercings. They'll say they'll pick on you. Oh, it's haram. It's this. It's that. But they don't really realize that it's a cultural difference.
Yes. I might know, but
So
really, I totally understand. My father worked in Dubai, in Saudi Arabia, in Abba,
yeah,
and we
yeah,
used to stop at Dubai. We never ventured further
yeah.
because it was the culture shock. It's so much. Also, because you don't know when you're going to be forced to, stone someone like your own
Yeah,
daughter. That one brought my father
yeah, that's
home,
true.
There's a lot of,
Yeah,
everybody envies the idea of emigrating, but there's the double-edged sword, and really, but traveling really makes you appreciate home. South
that's
Africa is
true.
just special.
For example, when my sister was born, she's like 8 years older than me. So as soon as my sister was born, my parents, she's the firstborn. So they immigrated to New Zealand. After 2 months, they came back to South Africa. They said they can't do it anymore.
Oh my word. Although,
Yeah,
wow. It's
and
just,
immigrating
even
with a
New
child.
Zealand. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's also a nightmare. You really want to be close to family when you have a
Yeah,
family of your own.
but nothing beats South Africa.
Oh, no. It's just,
But one
we're
thing I
so
hate
blessed here.
about South Africa is the old people that still have that racism in them.
Yeah, I kind of feel like, I don't know, maybe because my brother also, talks to me about this a lot. And I kind of feel that the benefit of age is that when you look at people, you sort of stop assuming their motives, so
Yeah,
because the thing is in South Africa it's just so taboo to
yeah,
be
that's true.
racist that no one will actually, and we are so aware of it. So unlike in the UK where you've got like this very cemented right and left wing politics, in South Africa
Yeah,
we're more like centrists. We have our conservative and our liberal aspects to us, and we somehow make it work. We're going to
yeah,
discuss that more this evening. But it's fascinating. In South Africa, we just have we can. very easily discuss things that ordinarily you wouldn't be able to do in other, like in the UK,
We're
you can't
very
even
liberal
discuss
in SA.
racism. Yeah, we are.
Yeah,
But we're also still pretty conservative. So people sort of like, they don't want to come across as racist as well. So, and I found that when I got older, I just stopped assuming that that's why they had an issue with me. And
yeah,
then your mindset tends to shift, and you start looking at the behaviors that are serving you and the ones that don't. Because the thing is, you're going to encounter
that's
people
true.
who are, terrible in their own ways, but most of the time, people just want to get on with their lives. They want to, it's the economics of things. They want to earn a good enough salary. They want to have a family. They want to be happy, not permanently under stress. But it's very rarely how it happens. And to be honest,
Yeah,
the science kind of supports that people really don't think about us that much. So,
no,
and so I think in South Africa, the difference is that we are not facing a political shift at the moment. We had our tough time like 30 years ago, but we've been building since then. And we get really like ticked at each other, and we have all of these, civil cases going on. But at our foundation, when there's a rugby match on, there's nothing like a South African, you know,
no.
pub moment.
Even even like how we just do our parties and everything, it's so much better.
Yes, we just have a vibe about us too. We can laugh at things other countries can't. Nando's is
Yes,
hilarious to us. So really, we have a lot of problems, but I'm such a patriot because genuinely seeing the world only makes you appreciate that we really have something special here. We have the advantages of really high skilled people, ample amounts of employment opportunity,
yeah.
well,
But like
employment
in
availability.
SA, we also have a soft life because, for example, here in the UK, it's so difficult to find a domestic helper.
Oh, yes. I'm
It's very,
totally
very
with you. It's
difficult.
the little things. My
Yeah.
sister lives in the Isle of Man, and I tell her all the time, I'm like, no, no, I'll live my first world life in my third world country. There's no way I'm making a
I
million
see
bucks
that you're a
somewhere else.
lecturer at the Cape Town campus, so you must be really enjoying your Cape Town life.
I'm actually at NMU. Where does it say that? I'm actually in Nelson Mandela. Oh, what do we? Well, they keep changing our name. I'm either in
Oh,
Gqeberha, Port Elizabeth, or Nelson Mandela Bay, depending on your
is
political
the Nelson
leanings.
Mandela Bay campus not in Cape Town?
I know it's in PE,
Oh,
little
oh,
PE.
my bad. I thought
No,
that it
no.
was in Cape Town.
One would assume, but it's only
Yeah,
because we couldn't get the government approval for that massive
yeah,
statue of Nelson Mandela we wanted to build in the Bay. That would have really made our point.
yeah.
But
So yeah,
okay, this has been so much fun. I am going to ask you to please chip in as much as you guys can as well. I really love, there's nothing like the personal experience of economics because no one can tell you. I tell people all the time, I'm like, go and experience a socialist environment, a socialist economy, and then tell me that it's truly better than what we have. Here we have a mixed economy. In fact, I'll come back to this review at the end of our session. Let's jump to what we're actually talking about. It is so awesome that you actually have experience and you are experiencing this difference right now. Okay. So tonight we're going to be looking at economic systems. So now there are, of course, the four main economic systems. Ah, there we go. Okay, so we have our basic economic systems, okay? And the reason that we have different economic systems is because there we go. Now it's syncing. Okay. Is because we are trying to answer the three central economic questions. So every economy has to answer, what do the people want? Okay. How do we
Sorry,
produce
ma'am.
it? Oh, yes.
Is this for learning unit 2?
Learning unit 2. Yes, sure.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Then we're staying right on track. And then if you guys have any questions pertaining to last week's lecture for Learning Unit 1, I'll stay on the line and just do a quick review there. But the most important thing is the PPC for your assignment. And I will go over those graphs specifically before your assignment is due. So we will spend some time on the most important elements just before. But I see, Ashil, I know you've already begun. I think you're probably nearly done with your first assignment. So if you need any more help, you just let me know. But I'm very
Thanks, ma'am. I'm
impressed.
actually done. I'm just waiting for submissions to open on the 4th. So
Wow,
yeah,
you're amazing.
you
I love
know,
it. Keep it up.
I used to procrastinate a lot last semester and I really struggled. So I said this semester I need to lock in.
Wow. Okay, well,
Yeah.
I am already impressed. You just
Thank you
keep
so
it
much,
up.
ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we have our three central economic questions, which we will be looking at. And it is essentially how every economy tries to deal with this scarcity issue. We have a infinite amount of wants and needs as a population, and we have limited resources that are there to satisfy them. So we have our four major economies. We've got traditional economies. Now, those are pretty isolated. We'll look at each one in detail. Command economies, there you want to think more North Korea, China, you know, it also now very much leans towards more socialist economies. They are also quite, communist in their original essence. They've just got more social programs. So command also lends itself to more socialist characteristics. And then we've got market or capitalist economies. And then right here in South Africa, we're all about the mixed economies. There are different salient features of each economy, and we're going to look at the contributions of these fine gentlemen. Forgive me, my laptop is fighting with me this evening. Okay, so here are three basic questions. So, like we said, the reason the UK's medical system is now currently under strain is because they have quite robust social systems. So they have to figure out how do they allocate their shrinking GDP. In other words, what the economy in the UK or even in South Africa, what we're able to produce in a year. We only have so many resources. We have a GDP of, in South Africa, our GDP is about I think it's between, I think it's 5 and 6 trillion every year. To allocate that for 60 million people and figure out how do we keep them all happy throughout the course of the year. Now, there are different ways we answer this question. What to produce? Well, if you're looking at a command economy, it's the government who tells you what you're going to produce. Okay, so the reason that sometimes the more socialist or communist governments tend to run out of things, North Korea being a perfect example, they run out of things because what they produce, what they focus on is military equipment over like basic farming. They have 100% literacy rate, but I suppose zero obesity is a good thing, but nutrition is also at very low levels. And because the objectives of the economy are dictated by the government. How to produce it is also another question that is either in a market economy that is answered by industry. Okay, you know, of course, that in industry we prioritize things like how efficiently, quickly, and cheaply can I produce something? Okay, and two, of course, the quality that I require for my consumers to not leave me. And then who are we producing for? Okay, so that also becomes a very government question. To use our third example, in South Africa, we have industries that want to produce and export to different countries and companies, but our government also gets involved if there are perhaps sanctions on a certain country. So there are parameters under which we have freedom, but at a certain point, for example, if we decided that Arms Corps, our military construct or military and steel manufacturing company, was going to start producing drones for Iran. They're under sanction. Now that becomes a political issue. Do we allow a company to act outside of, global political dominions? Okay, so that cannot be allowed. So in a mixed economy, you have a balance between both your industries and your governments, answering these three central economic questions. Now, the most important thing and the big thing that separates the economic systems we're going to look at are things like property rights. Okay, so who owns the factors of production? We know we looked at it last week. Our factors of production are, of course, land and natural resources. It's labor. Your ability to be paid for your labor means that you own your labor. Okay, that means that we are operating under a market assumption. You own that factor of production. Then, of course, we've got capital, for which you are paid interest. So you provide capital as a household, and you are provided interest by industry or financial institutions. Okay, and then of course, the last one we have is entrepreneurship, for which you are provided profits. So if you own your factors of production, when you are remunerated for using it in the production process, you get paid for it. Okay, and that's what a capitalist system is based on, or a market system. Now, because everything comes down to property rights, you can see why in South Africa, we lie at this perfect level here. Okay, we are right between your command and your market economies. We have a very strong private sector, but we also have a public sector which dictates things like minimum wage rates. We have BEE policies. We have property rights that could be eliminated if you believe the media, and they say that there, of course, the expropriation of property without compensation, depending on your news source, either it's happened, it's happening, or it will happen. We'll see. Okay. There are a lot of barriers to losing this in South Africa. The one big problem is that if we don't have property rights, it makes it very difficult to invest in that economy. If your land that you own or your company, the factory you build here, can be taken without notice or compensation. So that's why in a market economy, a government cannot claim your property. But in a command system, technically no one in the population apart from government owns any property. It is all controlled by government. That's why in South Africa, you'll see there's always a big push towards nationalism. It means that the government controls things. And the idea behind that is so that we can do better distribution of our current part of GDP. Okay, so we're hoping that by government taking over, that they can distribute our current property better. That is the whole motivation behind it. Of course, we've seen how this outcome lands in real life. But, we'll see. And then, of course, there's the traditional economy. Now, there are not many economies that still operate in this traditional manner. It's typically very isolated tribes of humans, maybe in Canada or South America, and they operate on a traditional economic systems. In other words, when we go back to our economic questions, what they produce is what is available to them, one, what has been produced by them generationally. How do they produce it? They use traditional methods passed down from father to son, like guilds. And then for whom do they produce? That is decided by either tribal elders or by a decision of vote. So traditional systems are not very commonplace in the modern economies. Now, essentially, in South Africa, we sort of fit in the Venn diagram right here in the mixed section between command and market. We do have some elements of a traditional market, which actually may play a more significant factor in South Africa, because traditionally, for example, you would either have a bartering system or you would be paid in cash. Modern market and command economies tend to use banking systems, very robust modern financial systems. So in South Africa, we currently operate with an unemployment rate of about between 27 and 30%. But we are not in poverty. Our money still has value. We still have people employed because a large proportion of our employment happens in the informal sector, in the more traditional markets. Okay, like we were talking, as Jill mentioned, how expensive it is to go to a domestic worker in a first world country. In a third world country, you don't have any of those labor restrictions because you can speak to someone, pay UIF, and essentially pay someone maybe like 200 to 300 Rand to clean up your house for the day. But that is not being tracked by SARS or Stats SA. It's extremely difficult to track cash, and we are a very cash-based economy. So a portion of our economy is actually being excluded from typical statistics, and we can only speculate as to how big our informal market is. Now, traditional means, of course, that things have been produced the same way in each successive generation. They are extremely rigid and slow to adapt to change. Their economic activity is frequently secondary to religious and cultural values. So they wish to perpetuate the status quo. In other words, change is not something that is viewed favorably. There are for example, I saw a video of a South American tribe that had been isolated from all people. All modern humans essentially are prevented from visiting this tribe. And the first time that a bunch of people got authorization, it was a bunch of researchers, they got authorization to go and visit this tribe. They collected a bunch of bananas and put it on a boat and floated it across the river towards the people who are waiting, this tribe of people who are waiting on the other side of the bay. And they were fascinated at the prospect of the boat. They had never done it. Now, when you think about it yourself, when you were a kid and you're playing by the river, you eventually figure out that, hey, you can use these reeds as boats. They're surrounded by nature and yet had never, moved to that level of technology, a boat. Okay, so, and the reason for that is simply this: they are culturally prevented and religiously prevented from progressing. So it becomes extremely difficult for them to even integrate into modern society. But now in South Africa, again, we very uniquely have elements of traditional system within our mixed economy. So property rights are all about ownership of factors of production. Okay, so when it is determined by a traditional economy, property rights are dictated by tradition, culture, or religion. All the coordination mechanisms are designed by tradition. In other words, just things don't change. Okay, there are no productive assets, there are no farms, there are no factories, unless that is part of, something handed down from father to son. The right to possess, to use, or dispose of tangible or intangible assets, or to have the right to the income that is generated by those assets, is determined by your economic system. So when the property can be publicly owned by government or boards, as it can be in socialism, or in capitalism where it's owned privately by individuals and companies. So here in the command system, of course, we can see just that. There's a central command system, a central planning authority. So China is a wonderful example. If Xi Jinping, the emperor of China, decides that China will now be the #1 producer of electric cars, they will in fact be the #1 predictor or producer of electric cars, because they will make it so. There is no red tape. There is no demand and supply. There is simply a all-seeing, all-commanding central authority that says, we are going to prescribe a specific output, a method of production, and who will be produced for, and everything is state-owned. Okay, so this also tends to be quite a socialist system. Of course, in modern economies, there is still property rights, but very robust social welfare programs generally mean that the government spends a lot of time and money and effort taking care of the population rather than, benefiting from its growth. So all factors of production, now they say except labor, because of course you do have to still be remunerated for your labor into terms of income or wages. But for example, in North Korea, in some Asian countries, what happens is you are given an exam, very much like your matric exam. And your outcomes dictate what job you have, which university you can go to, and what you can study. It dictates the rest of your life. So, and it's a very clever way to organize an economy, but it does take away the freedom of people to choose how they're going to allocate their factors of production, their hours in a day. And the idea behind allowing people in a market system to choose is that we hope they'll be more motivated, as opposed to being told this is what you'll be doing. Now, a market system is very much about the interaction of buyers and sellers. The problem is, this is the most efficient system we as humanity have ever created. Okay. Overall, it is an economic system which requires minimal government intervention, no central planning, and economic decisions are simply a result of interactions between buyers and sellers. In other words, a company produces something, they advertise or make it available to private individuals. If we are willing to buy it, we vote for that product's production using our money. So we become very effective at allocating our own resources. Okay, so we're not relying on a central planning body to tell us how we should spend our money, or what we need to drive, or what we need to wear or eat or anything like that. We simply work for our money, and then we are allowed to allocate our money. So think of the market as a type of voting system. Every time you buy something, you make that product more popular. You also fund the company that produces it so they can produce more of that product. If we don't like something, we stop buying it. Okay, we also, I mean, you can see this very often in like the modern world where we boycott a company, for example. Okay, that is our way of voting against a company. We're saying we're done with you. We stop giving them money and we start allocating it to somewhere else. Now, the issue with this is obviously that it is largely driven by self-interest. It is the market mechanism. Adam Smith would call it the invisible hand. It coordinates the selfish actions of individual, but ensures that everyone is better off. Okay, so if I was to give this to you as an example between the difference between a command system and a market system, is in a command system, or in an even mixed system like in South Africa, we've got quite a massive government, like just in general, we've got a lot of people in government versus our population. But we're still relying on those, say, 10,000 people to make better decisions for the 60 million people they represent than the 60 million people they represent, who have an ability to say, I worked 1 hour, I received 50 Rand. I know how much I want to get for this 50 Rand that makes that work worthwhile. So we as individuals are making those decisions. We have private freedom, individualism. We can decide, and there is limited government intervention. It is all decentralized decision making. Our incentives are competition and money. What is the problem with this market? It creates some of the most unequal societies in the world. Okay. So yeah, that is a bit of a thing. Okay, because it is so efficient. The market tends to raise all ships. So overall, there is more wealth in a market system. So the entire economy becomes wealthier. So all the participants in the market tend to become wealthier over time, but at differing rates. So if you look at a free capitalist market system like the US, you've got people who are living on the streets who can't afford food, who are hooked on fentanyl, and you've got a trillionaire in the form of Elon Musk. Horribly unequal. Okay, that is not to say that necessarily a command system would be better at allocating. Okay, we can see that as well. The reason that it would not necessarily be better at allocating is because in a socialist system, you'll have higher taxes in order to redistribute the income. But it does tend to cut out the merit aspect of work. So here in a market system, because you own the factors of production, you are incentivized to work hard. If your income tax rate was only 10%, there's not much incentive to not work. But as it stands, at a tax rate of like 40%, that means that you're essentially working from maybe January until March, or even April or May, for the government taxes. And you're surviving on the rest of it. If you make R1 million or more in South Africa, you're paying nearly half of your income away in taxes. You're still working for the full million. You're just only getting half of it out of your salary. So that becomes a bit of an issue. And then despite the fact that for the last 30 years, we have focused on nothing but redistribution and equality in our economy, We are one of the most unequal societies in the world. We actually have a mechanism for tracking that in economics, and South Africa has a Gini coefficient that is just ridiculously high. Because it is very important at some stage to understand what governments are good at and what they aren't good at. And when they get too bloated, they tend to be less effective. Also, in a true command system, you can't do things like steal money. There are consequences to bad actions by the Central Planning Committee. Okay, so the coordinating mechanisms is all voluntary exchanges. We decide to go to work and our value is reflected in our salaries. Sometimes we feel we're being underpaid, but that's just the way of the world. Okay, the characteristics of the system is there are built-in incentives in the form of income. There is competition. We compete for jobs, we compete for promotions, companies compete with each other for market share, consumers compete for products. The entire market is driven by self-motivated willingness to exchange time and energy for the goods and services we need to survive. The whole thing relies on a negotiation mechanism. Every market you see has a buyer and a seller. We'll look at the 5 specific mechanisms or characteristics of a market in order for it to exist. It's all about market capitalism. Capitalism is about efficiency of allocation of resources. It's about capitalizing on opportunities. Okay, seeing the market gaps and imposing yourself in it. Okay, so they use market mechanisms as well. In other words, they look at the demand and supply. So what every company does is they do market analytics. They look at what does their customer base want, and that's what they focus on supplying. How much can they charge us? Well, if they charge us too much, for example, OpenAI was the first AI chatbot, and we were very excited about it. And then they jumped to like 1 million users in the first month. It was amazing. The company went from being a 1 million rand nothing burger to a 240 billion rand company valuation. It was amazing. But because they rose too quickly, they attracted competition into their own market. And within weeks, we had 15 different competitors fighting for the same market. The problem is because it is such an attractive market, such a unique opportunity, we now have the Magnificent Seven all fighting to retain some sort of income from the AI boom. The other problem with the market system is that we also have the possibilities of bubbles, okay? Because we hope that price is a rationing function. In other words, you as a person are going to decide, okay, I have 60 Rand in my pocket. Now, someone who's going to be wealthy in the future would think, okay, I need to, okay, let's say you have 100. Let me think about this rationing function. Okay, so in other words, we are, as individuals, are going to say, I've got 100 Rand, I want to eat and I want to, I don't know, secure my future in the long run. Okay, so you would then ration. You would maybe go to Woolworths, buy let's presume a 60 Rand pie, and then at the same time, buy a 60 Rand share in Woolworths. Okay. You also have an allocator function. What are you going to choose to buy? How do you allocate your money? And that is the role of money within our economy. It shows a company what something is worth to us and how much we are willing to allocate towards it. Now, a mixed economy This is where your private and your public sector are constantly in negotiation between command and market mechanisms. So in the real world, a lot of economic systems are mixed. Okay, in the UK, you'll also see a lot of mixed systems. In South Africa, you've got a mixed system. The closest we get to market systems are probably the US and Singapore. Command systems are probably China, but North Korea is probably the most accurate. But as a mixed economy, South Africa is truly mixed. We are first world and third world. We have there are a lot of perceived problems in our society, and they're debated vigorously. There's a proportion of the private sector that is constantly pushing growth, and a portion of the public sector that's currently letting us down. Okay, in PE, I read an article recently that said that because of the infrastructure deteriorating over the last decade, we've essentially lost all of the car manufacturing companies that used to make us what we like to consider mini Detroit. Yeah, I know, it's sad, but still, we produced cars. It's what we did. But all our car companies have left. And they left a gaping hole in our economy because now they used to employ people. And the thing is, it doesn't happen quickly. It happens slowly. VW is the last car company that we have in the metropolitan PE area. If they are to depart, we're in real trouble. Now, the problem in a mixed economy is that we can't, as individuals, say, we're going to go out and fix the infrastructure. We don't have a market mechanism for that. It is a market failure. It is a need that cannot be fulfilled by profit mechanisms. So we can't get it done. But if the government doesn't do their part, then the companies are going to revolt. So, we're watching the slow decline of a very interesting aspect of the country, really. Let's see, okay. So in a mixed economy, we have predominantly or primarily private ownership rights. But there are also public ownership of factors of production. In other words, the biggest landowner in South Africa is actually government. Only they have no incentives to reallocate that land. Coordinating mechanisms, all decisions are made either by the market or the state. In other words, when I worked with the agriculture section, they look at what their citrus is worth globally. And of course, they want to sell to the market that's willing to pay the most. But if we get into a trade dispute or there's some diplomacy issues, we can be instructed by the state that we cannot sell to certain countries. So that is where the market has made a decision, but the state, they make the final decision. Now, South Africa, now here we have imperfect competition. We have perfect competition, we have privatization, and we have nationalization. Now, let me explain, because like I said, in South Africa, we truly have a mixed economy. So imperfect competition is a model of the market where individual buyers and sellers have the power to influence prices in the market. So we can be price makers. We can negotiate. Now, this exists in an industry with more than one firm. Okay, so that means that at least one firm is like a price setter. But when it can even take the form of a monopolistic competition. So an individual firm can be affected by the actions of its competitors. In perfect competition, that can't happen. Everything is dictated by the market at a set price. Nationalization is the transfer of ownership of assets from the private sector to the public sector. So that's where government takes over ownership. This happened to, oh, actually, that happened the other way. Telecom was privatized. What has been nationalized? There's always a push to nationalize our mines. That's where government would take control of all of the mines. It would increase bureaucracies, make the entire mining market a little bit more inefficient because, of course, there would be political interference. But, you know, it's always on the cards and something we must consider. The thing that holds it back is the fact that in South Africa, our private companies are quite powerful because they're very strong. They've existed for a long time and they've got strong balance sheets. So to take companies out of their power is a very difficult thing, and it of course puts the entire economy at risk by making us look unfriendly to future investments. Now, if you're looking at the perfect competition model, this is based on the assumption that there are large numbers of buyers and sellers, and that there are identical goods being consumed by a large number of buyers. Okay, in other words, everyone is a price taker. Okay, no one buyer or seller can influence the market. It is purely the interaction between demand and supply that gives you an outputted price, as opposed to imperfect competition, which is like Eskom, okay? When they say they're doing a 16% tariff hike, we're like, oh no. But that's pretty much all we can do. Then, of course, privatization is the opposite of nationalization. That's when there's a transfer of ownership of assets from the public sector to the private sector. Something like Telkom, okay? We used to sit on the line with Telkom when they still did only landlines for maybe 3 hours waiting for assistance. It was the bane of my existence. One day, 20 years ago. Okay, so it was a very different company. Now they offer very cheap data packages. They've become more efficient. They have fewer budget deficits. They don't require a lot of additional funding. The enterprise itself has become more profitable and more efficient over time because the private sector has an incentive to fix a business. They have an incentive to make the business more efficient and more profitable, whereas a government does not. Now, the last thing we're going to cover this evening are the men behind the systems. Okay, you don't need to know very much more than the basic outlines of these different mixed systems. So you will have to, I think most likely in the assignment, you'll have to construct an essay detailing the different economic systems. You'll have to give examples, and then I would say focus on the aspects of property rights and coordinating mechanisms. And maybe your introduction can detail the 3 central economic problems. These slides are already all available for you guys, so they are there. Hi, Shell.
Ma'am, will we ever be examined in the summative exam on the 3 men?
Let's see, they may refer to them, but they will not ask you for a detailed view of their lives. Essentially, all you need to know is Adam Smith was all about division of labor, free trade, the invisible hand, limited role of government. So he was our capitalist. He believed that the market had its own natural coordinating mechanisms. So even if we went through a recession, that it was a natural thing that happens in market cycles and that we would recover by ourselves. So if an industry drops, for example, like the car industry in PE, the assumption under Adam Smith's ideas would be that those people would just get new jobs in another industry, something similar. It's a free movement of labor. There's also a division of labor, which allows people to specialize and makes them, the more you specialize, the more valuable you become to the market. That's what Adam Smith argued. Then, of course, you've got Karl Marx. Okay. Oh, sorry. Another thing Adam Smith argued was, of course, that individuals should be allowed to pursue their own self-interest. He said that you make the most number of happy people if you just let everybody pull the government back and let everyone make decisions for their own happiness. The market acts as an invisible hand to ensure that your decisions promote national interest. In other words, if you are able to have a small government that only takes 10% tax, you are incentivized to work harder. And because you work harder, your life starts to reflect those values. And it's, so your self-motivate, you have a self-promoting mechanism almost simply by having a job. Division of labor was all about the production process being broken up into like parts. Each worker focused on a specific part. It had advantages for time saving and, of course, development of specific skills. Now, as academics, we are obviously leaning towards the Adam Smith aspect of improving your value to the market. Okay, you want to go in saying, I have a BCom degree. You want to employ me because of what I can already contribute to your business. Okay, so it's more of you're trying to attract, or you're trying to give your buyer of your skills a value proposition that makes them want to pay you more. Okay. Karl Marx, on the other hand, is considered the father of communism. Now, he argued that labor was the source of all wealth in the economy. So he believed that labor was being exploited, and at the time, very possibly it was. Okay. In fact, if you look at the UK's history, like by the time that they finally outlawed child labor, there were so many children who had lost limbs, fingers. There were 2-year-old, 3-year-old chimney sweeps because they were the only ones that could fit. There were terrible things that happened in, those during the Industrial Revolution and the industrialization of those economies. So those people really suffered as well. So, it's interesting from one perspective, but when you really look at the histories, you see that people truly suffered in all aspects of the world, in all areas of the world. People suffered horrendous things in the past so that we could, benefit as the later generations. But they suffered. You should see why where they went so far liberal or so far leftist as well, was because of exactly that. People were being exploited, working in horrible environments in countries, even in Russia. My goodness, the serfs were where the word servant comes from. So it's very fascinating when you look back at the history of these things. So you won't be examined on it, but if you want to give your AI a workout, it's just a fun conversation. So typically, Marx argued that capitalism would lead to its own destruction. It does very often lead to a problem because it creates a lot of inequity. When the inequity gets too vast, you get a revolution. Okay, there's a revolt against capitalism because the richest people in South Africa are amongst the richest in the world, and the poorest people in South Africa are amongst the poorest in the world. We've got a terrible Gini coefficient. So we always have at the back of our mind that a revolt is possible. Okay, and will of course be then replaced by an outcome that hopefully doesn't eat all the rich, but essentially that is the idea behind it. And what we are experiencing nowadays is more a version of neo-Marxism. It's more a philosophical, modernized take on Marx's original ideas. So the original Marxists were all about having a fair shake at life. They were very hardworking people, so they were working in terrible conditions in factories, and they just wanted to be able to see the value of their labor. You know, Adam Smith was all about that, actually. He's you keep what you kill. You keep the crops that you help grow. Karl Marx just wanted to help keep the crops, but then have a share of the distribution as well. Of course, this tends to be a system that we inevitably end up with. The more advanced every economy gets, we tend to move more towards socialism. But essentially, we are asking a population to vote for their own personal income, which means we just roll out more and more social programs. And if you haven't noticed, there is no such thing as a temporary government program. But that's how they all start. But of course, we are still paying pandemic checks of 350 Rand 7 years after the pandemic, because again, no such thing as a temporary government program. Okay, so that is also the problem. And of course, now the ruling party is the one that provides that welfare blanket or that security. So we're asking people to choose to not receive that free money in return for the prospect of a job, you know, at, at a minimum wage. It's just a hard decision for people to make, really. So we have to be realistic. And so that's why we have to examine socialism so closely, because you can see that over a period of time, a very robust and well-funded healthcare system now demands 250,000 Rand just to enter the country. Thank you for that, Ashil. That is brilliant information. And then, of course, we've got Keynes. Now, John Maynard Keynes, I showed a picture of him in class today, and I called him good looking, and a lot of the girls judged me. Fair enough, I was joking. But this man is the bane of my current existence. He believed that markets should be, oh, sorry, hold on. He said that markets should be allowed to function freely without government intervention. That was his original idea. However, in the event that markets do not have sufficient aggregate demands, then it is the duty of government to step in. In other words, during a recession, we become very concerned about how much we are outputting, how much we're spending. And so every household in the world stops spending. We start tightening our purses, we stop spending, which means we are no longer funding those companies that are producing the products that we want to see. So Keynes said that it is government's jobs to then step in and purchase what we will not purchase for ourselves. Okay. You can see how that becomes a bit of an issue, because that leads us to an expansionary fiscal policy, where every time we hit hard times as an economy, the government is now justifying in spending more than the consumers, which means that they buy what they want to buy on our behalf, which means they fund the industries and products that they feel are best for us, okay? And we are left with the bag. Now, during COVID in South Africa, we took a $500 billion loan, a billion Rand loan from the IMF. Okay, that was done because during the pandemic, no one wanted to spend money. Everyone was very scared about what the future held. I was kind of hoping for a zombie apocalypse. I just wanted to, I wanted to live the video game. I won't lie. But then I didn't want to spend my money, so government ended up spending our money. And what did they spend 500 billion Rand on? Hand sanitizers, masks, PPE we never saw, and probably a lot of very fancy cars and Louis Vuitton purses. But we'll never be able to prove it. Apparently, there are more commissions my students were telling me about, but I stopped paying attention after the first three because expansionary fiscal policy is well within government policy thanks to this man right here. It is their obligation to save the economy from itself and start spending when we don't. And on that very cheerful note, I will stop there. For the essay, guys, that you have to do, you can just cover the very basics. You're just going to tell me about, the introduction will be the 3 economic questions. Then we'll go into the property rights and coordinating mechanisms for each of your 4 economic systems. You'll tell me 1 characteristics, which obviously you can see here in the box next to the economic system. And then you can just specify how the property rights and coordinating mechanism work within that economy. And then the last thing you need is to just give me an example. Okay, so you can keep it quite short, sweet. I am looking, you want to keep each fact to a sentence. Keep your sentences short and sweet. Watch the AI as well, mostly just because these are very useful things to know when you're trying to win an argument. Trust me, it will happen very much in the future. And a very big thing that perhaps we neglect is that the real advantage of having a business degree is your ability to articulate a position of economic substance. So in other words, when I say that I have more capitalist leanings, people can say that I understand what I'm saying. Okay, and I can argue for why I believe that. Okay, do I love the mixed economy? There are elements I like. I like having a robust social system. But what I would do is maybe shrink the government a little bit and make them more efficient so that they work for the private economies. But do I want a horribly unequal society? No, I'm happy to pay my taxes. But I also want mechanisms that allow me and my family to benefit from my hard work. Okay. So it's very important to not just be able to regurgitate these facts, because nowadays an AI can do that for you and it'll probably do it better than most. But what we need to be able to do is to say, you know what? Because of scarcity being a universal feature in economic life, price serves as a rationing factor so that we can, allocate scarce supplies to the people who are willing to pay the highest value for them. As a business person, that is a very rational approach to why you want to have a certain price. You are very often not going to have the opportunity to go and write a report somewhere else and then bring it. And then you will have people who question you openly using an AI that you use to generate your idea. What's important is that you be able to, understand, like Ashil was explaining, that, the medical system that you are experiencing is very different to the one that you experienced in South Africa. Being able to rationalize that and say, okay, these are the parts of the economy I've experienced that didn't work. Now that allows you to make predictions, which is what economics is all about. Now you could predict that if the NHI actually passes in South Africa, that there will most likely be a deterioration in the medical standards, very much like what has happened in the UK. Maybe it'll be a faster regression, but it's very likely that if a first world country that had a well-funded medical system couldn't make it work in the long term, good chance it probably can't work anywhere else. And if it could, what did they get wrong? And that offers you an opportunity to figure out even more information, and then maybe even come back and help with our policy decisions here. So there is there are so many things that economics tries to explain, but it's just a model of reality. So, try to make this theory valuable to yourselves, because in the long term, these things will help you make the right decisions so that you can, allocate your money, invest your money into places where, you're not going to buy Discovery Health if the NHI is about to come out. But if you know that the NHI policy controllers are looking at the UK as an example, they're probably not going to push it for the next 15 years. So why not buy Discovery Health now? Also, if NHI comes into play, it's a very good chance that, like in the UK, you'll have a spike in medical aid premiums, in which case Discovery was exactly the share to buy. So apply this economics theory, see where it fits in. What can you learn? How can you articulate these things? The exam will be something that you study for, it will come naturally as you start hearing things that start to resonate in your economics brain. So I'm really looking forward to a great semester, guys. Do you have any questions? Before I close off, I know we covered, I'm just going to also just open up Learning Unit 1, just so that you can see if there, from the learning outcomes, if there is anything you weren't quite sure about. The PPC is, of course, the only real thing you need to know for the assignment. But in general, it is useful to just be able to understand things like the difference between macro and microeconomics. For example, the interest rates and the inflation rates, which are very much macroeconomics, are still have an impact on your microeconomics as an individual. So you need to understand at what level you are being impacted by the globe, by your country, by your industry, and how you can put barriers in place to protect yourself. The PPC was obviously our choice between two products and how we allocate our resources, our scarce resources in our economy. Economics is simply the study of scarcity and how we allocate our scarce resources to our infinite ones. Economics is all about the three principal questions. It's all about scarcity, guys. It's all about what we don't have in abundance. And then, of course, opportunity cost is every time we make a decision, there is a trade-off. If we choose to purchase more cars, there are probably fewer houses in our future. We make that sacrifice. Positive economics, we're all about actual statistics. So when I tell you that the inflation rate is 5% in South Africa at the moment, according to Stats SA's evaluation of our June inflation, that is a positive economic statement. If I told you our inflation numbers are high, that is normative economics. I'm just selling you a narrative. I'm not giving you something you can actually check and verify. Of course, economics is a social science because we are so influenced by human decisions, politics. Every decision globally in industry or at home has an impact on everything else, every other participant in the market. And then, of course, we looked at some common mistakes in reasoning about economics, like post hoc, ergo propter hoc, which is just as it was, so it shall be. But you guys can look at those in more details. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to email me anytime. I do work on campus, so it generally takes me a couple of hours to get home so I can answer your mails, but you are always my priority. So please don't worry about emailing me anytime, and I'm happy to help. But otherwise, I have gone well over my time. If you guys have any questions, I will stay here. Otherwise, have a